In this video, we'll create and edit a 3D model. After completing this step, you'll be able to use extrude, use fillet, and identify timeline features. In Fusion 360, we want to carry on with our dataset Intro to Sketching. Now that we have a closed set of sketches, we want to bring them into 3D by using some of the tools at our disposal. We're going to focus on the Create dropdown, and we're going to take a look at Extrude. Extrude will allow us to take what we've done and bring it into 3D. Notice that there are two different types of extrudes. We have an extrude and a thin extrude. We're not going to be looking at thin extrude in this example, but it is helpful if you want to use your sketch profiles and create a thin wall solid. For us, we're going to use that extrude type, and then we need to select the profile or profiles that we want to extrude. By default, Fusion will want to use these closed regions that we've created from our sketches. Because we created two rectangles, we have three separate individual regions that we can use. We can select one of them, or we can select multiples of them as needed. For our example, I'm going to select the center point rectangle, which is going to be two of our profiles, and then notice on the screen we have some manipulators. We have one for taper angle and one for distance. I'm going to grab the one for distance by holding down the left mouse button and dragging it into 3D. As I do this, the number changes in my distance dialog as well as inside of the extrude menu. I can manually change these, but note that we don't want to hit the enter key until we're done because it'll OK the entire dialog. Previously, we talked about having components and how that can be helpful. Well, so far we've created a sketch without thinking about components. But when we're creating our first solid, we have the option here to create a new body or to create a new component. It's important to note that the best workflow is going to be creating new components and then working with the bodies inside of those components. As this topic is a little bit more advanced, we're going to focus on the default option of creating a new body for now, but I simply want to mention that we do have the option to change the operation type at this stage. Once we select OK, the default settings in Fusion are to hide the sketch that was used. For us, I want to expand the sketches, select the eye icon next to Sketch 1, and I want to create another extrude. This time, I'm going to grab this region and the region that overlaps. I'm going to use that same arrow and begin to drag this up. And you'll notice what happens by default is the highlight is red. This is telling us that it's removing material. It's actually cutting away part of our solid. If we rotate this around from the back, this becomes more apparent. If instead we want to do something such as only keep the overlapping sections, we can use intersect. You'll notice the preview changes, and now we see a preview on the screen of what we would get to keep. We can also simply join the two solid bodies together. So this is another option that we can use, or we can create its own new body or new component. Once again, there are reasons why we might want to do each one of those options, but for our example, we're going to select join and say OK, then we're going to hide that sketch. If we expand the bodies folder, you'll note that we have one single solid body here. Now that we have a solid body, I'm going to begin to manipulate it. I'm going to go back to a home view, and then from my modify menu, I'm going to take a look at some of the modification tools we have. There are things like press pull, which is a direct editing tool that allows us to make adjustments to things like feature size and location. Then we have fillets and chamfers, which allow us to round off the corners of a design or create a taper on a corner. As you go down the list, you'll notice there are many more modifications that we can do. Things like shells and drafts, scaling, or even changing how bodies interact. What we want to do in this example is take a look at fillets. I'm going to get started by creating fillets on these corners. And one handy thing in Fusion 360 is that we can actually select these edges through the solid geometry very easily. Once I've selected those, I'm going to begin pulling the manipulator, and notice that it changes the corners on the model. As the fillet gets large enough, you'll notice that it's actually creating more solid geometry by extending the intersecting body. For this example, I'm going to bring this back and manually enter a value of 0.25. We can add multiple fillets in the same dialog, and if you want to add more to this original selection, you just need to hold down the Control or the Command key. So if I want to make all of these external edges a 1/4 inch, I can simply do that by adding them back to that selection. If I want to add multiple fillets underneath this, I can hit the plus icon to add another selection set. However, for the purposes of this, I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to create those fillets individually. So once again, we'll go back to fillet, and this is great practice for us to manually select each of those edges. And I'm going to add a 0.25 value. Then I'm going to hit plus, and I'm going to select a couple extra edges. And on this one, I'm going to say 0.325. So these are going to be just a little bit larger, and we'll say OK. So now if we take a look at the timeline, we have our original extrude, our second extrude, and then we have a single fillet feature. Now, even though we had two different sizes, we were able to stack them underneath this single feature. If we want to make any changes, we can right-click and edit or double-click on it to go back into that dialog. You see here that we have complete control over both of those, and if I want to make the second one a little bit larger, I can just simply change that value and say OK. We can also add more by coming back in and selecting additional edges. I'm going to add a 0.125 fillet, and I'm going to say OK. Now as we rotate the model around, you'll notice that the fillets are blending in nicely, and we've added several to this model already. I'm going to go back to a home view, and note once again that we have a sketch, we have two extrudes, and now we have two different fillets. Let's go ahead and make sure that we do save this design before moving on.